Welcome everybody to today's Climate at Noon webinar as part of the Northern Climate Network. We're a group here at Northern Michigan University, co-sponsored by the Marquette County Climate Adaptation Task Force. Happy Earth Week, everybody. I'm so glad you could be joining us today. Hope many of you were able to participate in a lot of the awesome programming that's been happening over the last few days. Special shout out to conservation crew, eco reps, Gamma Theta Upsilon, the Animal Club. Special shout out to the Citizens Climate Lobby and everybody else as part of the Earth Week events this week. Really, truly awesome to be part of a lot of that. Today, I'm so thrilled to introduce our guest for our Climate at Noon webinar today. Michelle Martinez is just an incredible human being. Honestly, she's one of the most treasured environmental activists, environmental justice activists in our country, especially in the state of Michigan. She's the acting executive director of the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. She was born in Detroit and raised by the Latino diaspora. Since 2006, she's worked in local communities of color to build power to halt climate change and the detrimental effects of pollution in Detroit. In 2019, she helped organize the march to make Detroit the engine of the Green New Deal. It should be. That would just be so cool. Leading up to the Democratic National Debate. She was a 2017 Equity Fellow at Wayne State University Law School's Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights and received the top 25 Latinx leaders from the state of Michigan Hispanic Latino Commission in 2019. She earned her Master's of Science in Environmental Policy from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment, which is now the School of Environment and Sustainability. And that's actually where I came to know Michelle. We are both part of the same program, although a year or two apart, working in environmental justice there. And now Michelle is one of the leaders behind the new Michigan Alliance for Justice and Climate, or MAGIC, which is a magical acronym. So Michelle wears a lot of hats, all of which are super cool. And I think it's safe to say that Michelle is an EJ superhero. And I am so pleased to have you here, Michelle. So today we're going to be discussing climate justice. And I think that is a very timely topic that needs more attention, especially up here, where we're trying to build more of a critical consciousness in the UP around issues of environmental justice. So without further ado, Michelle, take it away. Thank you for coming today.
Yeah, thank you all. And thanks, Ryan, for inviting me and for connecting and making that Detroit Upper Peninsula connection. So much love for the UP. Actually, my sister is a graduate of Northern Michigan University. So as a teenager, I got to hang out in NMU's campus a little bit and learn from some super Upers how to do some amazing things. So yeah, lots of love for the Upper Peninsula, and was able to go to the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community for Native Justice Coalition statewide meeting a couple of years ago, and just learning from folks in the Upper Peninsula like Megan Hess and Dobby Reinhardt, who are just amazing leaders, and so glad to learn from you all too. And look forward to connecting, as this is the beginning of a long road together, right, for Earth and environment. So yeah, I guess today, you know, I wanted to share with you all some of the thoughts and learning around climate justice as a framework, as a critical framework for survivance, justice, and transformation of our society, right? I think climate justice is so critically important to me, and in a time when we're watching and witnessing and becoming a part of the largest civil rights movement in the United States history, that it is something that we should all be interrogating in how all of our work connects to the liberation of all peoples in the United States and globally. So it's a practice, right, that we are trying, and I'm humbly start with me in Southwest Detroit. I was born in the Latinx diaspora. My family came in 1915 to be a part of the growth in the automotive industry. We came here for the $5 a day promise. I'm the little one on the table. My dad came from Colombia in 1968 when the city was on fire, right? You know, the rebellion against police violence in 1968, against people being locked out of jobs in the automotive industry, and Black voters being locked out of the political system, which is much of what we're experiencing today, right? But here I am in 1981, you know, getting ready to embark on this journey. Behind me are the wrought iron gates that my dad manufactured in our garage behind our house for near 40 years. Today I run Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. It's a statewide coalition that really came out of the legacy of activists like Donnell Wilkins, Rhonda Anderson, Bunyan Bryant, who really seeded the environmental justice movement in Detroit and said, you know, no matter where you play or pray or work or stay, you should have access to a clean environment. And due to the long legacy of industrialization in the Midwest, most people have some exposure, right? But Black, Indigenous, immigrant communities in Michigan are disproportionately impacted by the toxicity, both in our water and in our air, but also in our land. So Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition came together in 2011 to try to get the state of Michigan to adopt an environmental justice plan. And had they adopted our recommendations in 2011, some of the worst parts of the Flint water crisis would have been either forestalled, or an early warning system would have been in place for the state to respond more quickly than it did. So we're still working on that journey, and really now expanding more aggressively into climate justice, right? So just so you all know, I'm going to try to I have lots of slides, so I won't go through all of them. But basically, I want to say, you know, climate justice is a movement, right? And it begins with us. It begins with you and me. It's in our families, in our homes, and in our schools, right? And there's a solution, right? I think Nancy Pelosi famously called it the green dream or whatever, which I think is great. But the vision of what we can achieve is in our minds and in our hearts. And we should continue to strive for that ideal. And the journey of that is a climate justice movement, right? So fundamentally, you know, I would argue that climate justice is really the center and binds three major pieces, right? We have climate activism, right, which principally came out of a very white and technocratic understanding of what greenhouse gases were, right? It comes from a social justice movement, which demands that we really unearth and uproot systemic oppression. And then it also comes from the underpinnings of environmental justice, which I talked a little bit about with Dr. Bryant and his teachings that I gained from Rhonda Anderson, who I think, Ryan, also you were involved with, which says, you know, there should be equity and fairness both in the procedures in which decisions are being made, but also in the distribution of the risks and the benefits of what we produce in American society. And in between all of those things is climate justice, right? Which combines all of those practices so that we come to a fullness and a wholeness and a transformation of our society, right? So it begins with our families, homes, and schools. I'm gonna start with a story. So in 2018, in the final hours of the Snyder administration, we were embroiled in a barrage of permits around natural gas facilities. And we were getting calls from around the region, really in 2017 and 2018, around pipelines and smokestacks and different things that were happening with fracking, right? So when we started to pay attention, you know, Rep Hamoud in Southwest Detroit, South Dearborn, came on Facebook Live and said, you know, tomorrow there's going to be a hearing around a new gas facility, and it's a subsidiary of Consumers Energy. It's going to expand 250 megawatts to burn fracked gas across the street from an elementary school, Salina Elementary. If you've never been to South Dearborn, it's really the landing place for folks who recently migrate from Yemen. If you know anything about what's happening in Yemen right now, it's absolutely dire, right? That the social infrastructure is collapsing, right? So you have just a mass migration of Yemeni, but it's historically been an Arab American community. And so the principal language is Arabic. 95% of the kids identify as Middle Eastern, and they are also the most polluted air quality monitor in the state of Michigan. So you had teachers come to this hearing saying that, you know, our kids can't breathe in the classroom. Why would you be putting more pollution and contamination in an area that's been out of attainment for sulfur dioxide? That means illegal levels of sulfur in the air for over 13 years, right? And, you know, unfortunately, like, the Arabic translation wasn't even present, right? But what we came to understand is that through this hearing, and the community actually defeated this expansion of the natural gas facility, that Consumers Energy was so embarrassed that their public image was being besmirched. I had Consumers Energy people calling me and literally apologizing for the way that this was rolled out. So, you know, what we were realizing is that, you know, industry, energy is a huge part of the climate problem. And much of you who are involved in climate already know this, right? That about 30% of our energy industry is responsible for the greenhouse gases that are associated with climate change, either through public electricity and heat, or fugitive emissions coming from oil and natural gas. Now, in the DTE service territory, up until a few years ago, you know, 90% of our natural gas, or our energy system was coal-fired power plants. And, you know, we realized that DTE was beginning to shift their power generation. I think, Ryan, you were a part of some of the movement when River Rouge decided to close its coal-fired facility, right? And the community in River Rouge is very concerned because with a closure of their coal-fired facility, it could be a third of their tax base, right? But in the place of that coal-fired facility, DTE Energy had aggressively begun to expand their natural gas infrastructure. And with Snyder leaving office, in the span of 3 months, we had 3 natural gas facilities that were either proposed or approved in huge levels, right? So the Ford DTE Energy Center was approved in the spring of 2018 at 250 megawatts, and then the East China methane burner, a $1 billion expansion, huge facility. Now, even with, you know, some of our partners like Union of Concerned Scientists and NRDC proving that we could have generated that electricity from renewable efficiency, storage, distributed generation, on-demand energy, and it would have been $336 million cheaper, the Public Service Commission agreed with the energy system to allow DTE to build this. They're now in lawsuits with Sierra Club and others because they didn't even properly model their air quality emissions coming out of the smokestacks. But the pipelines and the smokestacks were not the only aspect of it, right? We had folks in rural lower southeast Michigan calling us because they were embroiled with FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, around the Nexus, the Vector, and the Rover pipelines in 2017, who were fighting these pipelines. And honestly, we had folks calling us who said, I don't know, they're in my backyard with an excavator and I don't know what they're doing, right? They were building a multi-billion-dollar fracked gas infrastructure without proper and procedural pieces that would allow people to be a part of that decision making. So DTE was really aggressive, right, during this period. And so we started to dig into their shareholder reports, and it turns out that, you know, during this time, DTE Energy had a $14 billion build-out plan for their natural gas, or as I call it, fracked gas facilities, right? Reducing the coal infrastructure and closing it down, and then slowly increasing their natural gas to replace it. You know, they've since sort of said, well, you know, we commit to a net zero by 2050 scenario, but this to 2040 necessitates that they do build out, right, that natural gas facility as they call it, a bridge fuel. So what's the problem with this? This is a map of all of the methane leakage across the United States. This area over here, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but in the Ohio River Valley, that's where the natural gas comes to Michigan through the pipelines that DTE is building. That's Marcellus shale gas, right? Some of the pipelines that come from the Texas basin are also coming up and linked with the pipelines in Michigan. And so with a lack of regulatory environment through the Trump administration, we hadn't even been measuring, much less regulating, what kind of methane is coming out of these areas. But you know, we're hoping that the Biden administration will be successful in establishing the methane rule and quickly getting it up to date so that fossil fuel companies have to at least disclose and begin to measure where the methane is coming out of their pipelines. But time is of the essence, right? And so the regulatory scenario, I caution, because as I said, for example, we regulate sulfur dioxide. It is a national ambient air quality standard. It's one of the 5 top toxins that we measure and we regulate. In Detroit, we've been out of compliance with the Clean Air Act for 12 years without any significant action. So, you know, we can create a regulatory environment to be able to help reduce and mitigate this, but unless we phase out fossil fuels completely, we're going to be trapped in this cycle. So what are we doing in response? So in 2018, we launched the Work For Me DTE campaign because DTE Energy and Consumers Energy now are both required to submit a 15-year plan that's called the Integrated Resource Plan. And the Integrated Resource Plan, you know, shows the Michigan Public Service Commission exactly what the energy portfolio for their utility will look like in 5, 10, and 15 years. And so we said, well, you know, where do normal citizens get involved with this, right? How does a Detroiter who pays DTE Energy or somebody who lives with a pipeline get involved, right? How does folks who are concerned about nuclear energy, how do they get involved? And so we started testing the system, right? DTE Energy was required to have some sort of public participation, and we went to their, what I call showcases, right? Where they showcase their renewable energy portfolio, which is pretty small. And they talk about how great they are, almost as if it's a marketing scheme. But in no way are they required to incorporate any of the feedback or comments that any of the participants go to. So we asked the Michigan Public Service Commission to have a public hearing on the docket, and over 200 people came out, right? And Norm Sari said himself, the commissioner, he's never seen so many people at a MPSC hearing. We held press conferences, we had fellowships for local residents to learn what exactly the MPSC is, how it regulates energy, what the energy system is. But we had to advocate that our comments be put into the public docket. You know, on the other side of this campaign, and this is Shamika Nichols here on the left with a microphone, she's the executive director of Solidarity. Solidarity, our partner, was also intervening with the University of Chicago, Abrams Clinic, and they were offering pro bono legal services to say, you know, we want things like community-owned rooftop solar in your plan. We want a rate system that's going to account for the over 200,000 shutoffs that DTE performs every year. We want to make sure that health is a part of what you're doing in your decision making. MEJC worked with scholars like Tony Reams, Amy Schultz, and Karina Grunland to do a health impact assessment to identify both how the pollution from the energy system would impact, but also how much access do low-income people, Black and brown people, have to rooftop solar or energy efficiency, when it's clear and the research shows that low-income people consume less energy than folks who earn more, but also pay a higher proportion of our total income. You know, there were marches and the Sunrise Movement, MEJC, and Solidarity, others doing direct actions in front of DTE Energy with hundreds of people just months before the pandemic hit. The MPSC ruled against us, right? They said they agreed with DTE on their energy portfolio, and we said, well, where do people get involved? Where does energy democracy happen? Where can the everyday person get involved? I was involved last week in a hearing with the Office of Public Participation for FERC, who was mandated to start an Office of Public Participation in 1978. It's been 40 years for the creation of the Office of Public Participation to actually take place. And in that time, an enormous amount has happened, right? The awareness of climate change, fossil fuel companies lying about their knowledge of it, right? An entire generation of coal and gas that could have been retired, right? But we knew these things in the 70s. And folks who fought for the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act had laws written into the books to make this happen for FERC. But again, we are up against Goliaths, right? And we keep seeing over and over again, and these are some of the news clips that came out during our fight against DTE Energy for a better IRP, that utilities were not only funding candidates in key caucuses, they were funneling dark money through the Alliance for Michigan Power, running Facebook ads, even up to today, right? Fighting against rooftop solar in Michigan legislature, right? So we are really, really clear that not only, does DTE pay a negative federal tax rate, that they're not paying their fair share into the system. We also proved that, the risks and the benefits of DTE Energy's energy system is disproportionately bearing down on Black and low-income people in Southeast Michigan. And all of this is under the auspices of the utility fixing the game, right? So we have no illusion about the imbalance of power that's happening in our political system, to the extent that actually some Upper Peninsula colleagues here in Houghton showed that the state's utilities are manipulating the system to their advantage. So again, it's about us, right? That unless we take the helm to fight these power systems and really take the gloves off, that business as usual will continue to harm yet another generation and limit the creativity and the capacity for social change. So I'm just going to do a time check. I'll try to be brief in the next piece. But for climate justice, we really want to focus on the solutions, right? Because we know that the problems are so many, right? And that it is not only politically challenging, but it is psychologically overwhelming and spirit crushing in many cases to continue to think about the powerlessness of what the political system can render. And so in response, you know, we're trying to say that there are people out there who have the vision to be able to bear the fruits of what our society could be transformed into. And so I offer this framework that, like, unless we're really thinking about the solutions longitudinally, we're not getting to the root of the problem, right? And so how we conceptualize the past harms are really important when we think about the future. So colonialism, slavery, and early settlement of the United States definitely and most importantly set the stage for its current manifestations, right? For toxics and where they are, for shutoffs and where they happen, for access to clean land and water, right? The rise in foreclosures and who that bears down on, even the lack of healthcare, joblessness, and the criminalization, right, of Black and Indigenous people, immigrants, right? Why that happens has to do with this root cause of systemic oppression. And so within the reasonably foreseeable future, we should, right, prioritize those who have been most impacted by the system so that we can build resilience, right, to the shocks on vulnerable communities. One of the main pieces that we worked with University of Michigan, Dr. Paul Mohai, and scholars like Brett Zuner, Laura Greer, and Delia Mayor is mapping, right, where are the most vulnerable communities who are most impacted by toxics through a cumulative impact assessment. This is happening in the White House. This is happening through congressional bills now, trying to identify, right, where these places are, where are EJ communities, so that we can start to build the kind of direct community investments that we need for that resilience, right? And then into the transformative future, really trying to resolve and account for harms with a regenerative economy, right? So what does that mean? Moving from extraction, right? Extraction of raw goods, extraction of labor, to an economy of care, right? Building in aspects of our social infrastructure, investing in our homes, investing in our communities in meaningful ways so that the problems of the past don't continue to recycle through our future. So some of the policies that we think are going to help us do that, right? We can't just focus, as I said, on greenhouse gas emissions, because we've learned through the National Ambient Air Quality Standards that focusing on pollution and contamination alone will not solve the root cause problems. We cannot create a market for carbon, which has not been proven to work, right? Or been proven to not work, I should say. That globally carbon markets have only reduced greenhouse gases between 0 and 2%, and the research shows that, right, in California and New Jersey, but it also has the potential of increasing particulate matter in EJ communities, as it has done on the Eastern Seaboard and in California, right? So we really say no to carbon markets. We want instead to have real solutions like dramatic community investment in renewable, efficient, and distributed community-owned energy generation, and a mandatory emission reduction, right, for companies and corporations. This is a aerial photo of Southwest Detroit, so you can see kind of where we are. You know, we also say no to net zero. And the reason why we say no to net zero is exactly because what I just showed you in the case of DTE Energy, that it actually permits for and allows for another generation of fracked gas for nuclear energy, through this idea of offsets and future technocratic solutions that are untested, unproven, and very costly. Some of those being proposed right now in Congress by the fossil fuel industry are carbon capture, utilization, and storage. On our website, we have a fact sheet where you can read more about that. Essentially, you know, the easy version is sucking down carbon through a huge vacuum and injecting it into the earth. We just feel like not only is that not a good solution because of the reasons I just listed, but it doesn't take care of this picture that you're looking at right now. It doesn't take care of the Athabascan nations in Canada in which the point of extraction is happening. You see other really extreme geoengineering solutions like solar dimming, which billionaire playboys love to use as a solution, but is also very dangerous. And we also see an expansion of offsets from companies like Google, who are now buying offsets so they can continue business as usual. When we know that the commodification of nature not only is dangerous for ecosystem services and biodiversity, but it can also have the effect of displacing indigenous people all over the world by using their land as commodified markets, displacing them from forests and traditional knowledges. So we advance real solutions like regenerative agriculture, electrified public transit, comprehensive cleanup, and social infrastructure, which is carbon-free and so necessary to be able to support the economy of care that we need. We also feel like false solutions like tax incentives for small-scale nuclear and fossil gas. This is something that's in Congress right now through a clean energy standard, where the fossil fuel industry is saying that natural gas should have huge public subsidies because it's a carbon reduction strategy, while not identifying the life cycle and the damages of fracking, for example, the runaway methane that we really at this point have no idea because we don't even have a regulatory system in place for it. Or small-scale nuclear reactors, which again, the extraction on indigenous lands has been harmful, not to mention tailing ponds and the lack of disposal plan in the United States right now for even current nuclear waste. We advance real solutions like the Thrive Agenda, which could cut our carbon in half right now and create 500,000 jobs in Michigan over the next 10 years. Equitable funding for schools. There are bills in Congress right now that make our schools a net zero and help teachers and our kids. Making sure that our water infrastructure is totally revamped and replaced. And then, of course, Justice 40 and EJ mapping that would help bring accountability to these funds and target them to those who have been most impacted by environmental injustice. So there are a lot of solutions out there, right? We're not the party of no, right? We're not the cave people that the fossil fuel industry paints us out to be. What we want is investment in social infrastructure and not a blank check for corporations and the politicians that they continue to pay, right? We believe that everybody should have access to a warm home in the winter, right? Everyone should have access to a good school and to care, child care and elder care, right? And so the climate justice movement begins with us. It begins with our families and our homes, our schools and our workplaces, and there are real solutions. So in closing, I just offer a picture of Mama Lila Cabell, who is one of my mentors and who passed 2 years ago, who was a part of a movement that said, you know, in our lifetime, we can eradicate racism. And whenever she said that to me, I, in the back of my mind, thought, I just don't know, right? Like in our lifetime, right? It's already been so many lifetimes. But it wasn't that one person would see that. It's that as a collective, we all have the responsibility to continue to take on that charge as an active role every day in challenging ourselves to take on the onus of eliminating racial injustice and to defend democracy, right? So thanks so much for listening to my talk, and I'm gonna pop a petition that we've got going on for energy justice right now against DTE if you wanna help take action. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was a fantastic, fantastic discussion. I'm gonna throw up some compostable confetti here. And I encourage you all to click on this link that Michelle just dropped in the chat and sign this petition so you can join this great work that she discussed. And I mean, after centuries of, you know, the murder, exploitation, discrimination, and disenfranchisement of people of color, I think it's really important that in this moment right now of our country's, like you said, Michelle, our country's largest civil rights movement in history, the world's actually, it's important that we recognize that racial justice is climate justice too. Because if we look at the sources of the majority of these greenhouse gases, many of them are directly imperiling the lives of people of color disproportionately in their own communities, in those fence line communities. And so while it is important that we protect and conserve wild spaces in rural areas, it is essential that we do go after the coal-fired power plants in low-income communities of color, for example, and prioritize those people in those communities for all climate actions, put equity at the center of all of our climate actions. And which brings me to my first question for you, Michelle. And if anyone has a question, please interrupt me. But I was wondering if you could discuss your thoughts on the concept of energy reparations, right? We've talked a lot about investing in an economy of care, having jobs and healthcare guarantees for these communities, certainly holding these industries more accountable and shutting them down wherever possible, but kind of more of a larger scale economic mobilization that repairs some of those historic injustices in their afterlives, right? Like colonialism, genocide, slavery, redlining, and the intergenerational pains and afflictions that still haunt a lot of those communities today, their current manifestations, but like making kind of energy like the model that Solidarity is going for example, right? Like community owned, community managed, rooftop solar, for example, in a lot of these communities. So I wonder if MEJC or Magic has wrestled with that idea, if you have any thoughts on the idea of energy reparations.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question. I'm happy to take questions. You can pop them in the chat, or I would love to hear your voices. Yeah, I mean, My feeling about this is that right now, you know, in Michigan, we pay some of the highest energy bills in the nation, right? And actually, the Upper Peninsula has the highest energy rate in the continental United States because UPCO, right, is a hedge fund. So you have some folks in the Upper Peninsula, like in Detroit, paying $1,200 a month for energy, right? When you have a polar vortex, you know what it feels like to have -35 and you really can't go outside and nobody's going, well, during the pandemic, no one's going anywhere, but, you know, not going to work, not going to school, right? People's pipes bursting, and it's a very scary time, right, not to have energy. We saw that in Texas, right? We're seeing the wildfires due to lack of energy regulation in California. So all of the experiences I think that you have identified over the, you know, the longitudinal, the last 400, 500 years that people have been experiencing are terrifying, right? And as I said, there's a pathway, right? And the pathway is by distributing energy to low-income people, making sure that everybody can afford to have a solar panel on their rooftop, to create a legal system that actually allows community solar. So if one community wants to build a solar array and distribute that energy, that it's legal for them to do so, right? Right now, the utilities are fighting tooth and nail against expanding rooftop solar, you know, and they have a 1% cap, right? And it's absolutely astounding how much money that they're putting into it, because DTE and consumers are monopolies, for example, right? They don't want to lose their control over what is the energy system as we know it today, right? So the model has been, you know, centralized generation, these huge mega plants, right, that generate our electricity and then distribute it out, which when you're building an automotive industry for 100 years makes sense, right? But when you're staring down the barrel of, you know, hurricane style winds in Michigan that's never seen it before, or polar vortex or high heat days for 2 weeks or more, it makes more sense in energy planning to have a distributed energy system. And so how we get there equitably absolutely necessitates that all people can get access to solar energy, rooftop solar, distributed generation, solar storage technology that is affordable. Right now, what the plan is a voluntary pricing, right? So it's like you can buy into DTE's renewable credit, for example. But if you can't pay your bill anyway, like, yeah, I want to pay more voluntarily, doesn't work. So we absolutely, through the Justice 40 initiative, California, for example, uses their cumulative impact map to identify communities, and then they route 25% of all of the revenue that they generate from their carbon markets to low-income communities to deploy solar and guarantee jobs for folks who are coming out of the prison system, formerly incarcerated veterans, people have been disenfranchised from the workforce. So it's not a pie in the sky, right? Like, it's happening already, but Michigan in particular is pretty behind on trying to, you know, deploy some of the pieces that we just really, really need, you know? I think energy reparations is one way to like categorize that big bucket, and energy equity is like a pathway to get there.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, Sarah, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for your talk. This was really fantastic, and I'm actually using this as part of a final exam for my environmental justice class that I teach. And so everything you said was awesome because it really connected to a lot of the themes we've explored this semester. And I was wondering, I'm really a big fan of the organization. I wonder, and Davi was a former student, a fantastic young leader. I'm wondering what your organization has done in the UP, what plans you have for the UP, and what can we do to help facilitate this work up here in the UP?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, some days I'm just like dreaming of swimming in Lake Superior, and I'm like, it's a 9-hour drive. Am I really going to do that tomorrow? So, that is to say that like spatially we're so far apart, right? But our issues are so close together, right? Especially when we talk about power, right? And the power that the utility companies have. Right. I know that, the fight for Line 5, for example, has been something that folks in the Upper Peninsula are really, really organizing around, whether or not it's through We the People Michigan and activists there. But, Line 5 is part of the energy infrastructure that feeds Marathon Oil, which we fight in Detroit, right? If there is a facility expansion, explosion, whatever's happening at that facility definitely impacts us here. So having those conversations and building those relationships is brand new for us, right? Because we've been so deeply entrenched in trying to figure out how to fix the Detroit problem. But we realized quickly, right, through the March for the Green New Deal that like, this is not a Detroit problem, right? This is an us problem. And really, it's a Lansing problem, right? And it's a Debbie Stabenow and it's a Gary Peters problem. And when we go to them and we say, hey, we need your help with DTE or Enbridge or any of them, they're like, thanks for letting us know about the Detroit problem. And it's like, no, right? So we need that relationship. Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition is a coalition, so there's always a chance to get an organization to join the coalition, and you can do that by contacting me, or if you don't want to join a big statewide organization, organizing with We the People, who has organizers in the Upper Peninsula, in Marquette, and in the Sioux area. So I want to lift that up and say, get involved with the folks who are local, but definitely connect with folks who are working on the state level too.
Awesome. Thanks again, Michelle.
Thank you.
I do have a question. I was just curious because utility companies around like the Midwest, just like in America in general, have been showing more and more interest in building solar and wind and more sustainable uses of energy. So how do you think that would impact like the low-income families, or like do you think that would make energy more like cheaper, more affordable for them? Would it have like a positive impact on low-income families, or would it have more of a negative or not really impact them at all?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sam. That's actually a really, really important question, right? The way that I came to learn about DTE's rates and how they decide, right, is that essentially for DTE, every single decision that they make about their energy system, whether it's replacing chairs in their executive offices or replacing bolts on a coal-fired power plant, that is a part of how the energy rates are made, right? So there's other things around like the labor that it takes, right? They're also guaranteed about 10% profit, right, on every single thing that they do. And so we've actually had like rumors and employees sort of tell us that, yeah, like DTE Energy needed to increase their profit margin, so they threw away all of their office equipment and spent a whole bunch of money because they needed to make sure that that profit margin was bumped a little bit, right? So the idea is that every single person who participates in DTE and who pays a DTE bill has every resident has an equal amount that they have to pay, right, for those expenses. So divide it by, we're 2.2 million residents or households, right? The thing is that the industry also pays, right? So Ford Motor Company pays in, you have Marathon Oil, they pay, and they have a different rate structure, right? Since 2000, the rate structures for the industry have been flat, but the rate structures for the residential customers has been exponential. So for the last 20 years, residents have effectively been subsidizing multi-billion-dollar corporations to produce in Michigan to remain competitive, right? And that's part, in addition to like building out the natural gas infrastructure, part of why we have some of the fastest rising rates in the United States in Michigan, right? Now, the other important thing is that as climate is unfolding, we're going to have to shut down all of the fossil fuel industry if we want to save life on Earth. Like, there's no question whatsoever anymore, right? How fast is the question? And so the big scary boogeyman, right, of the right is like, they're going to take away your ice cream and you're not going to have hamburgers and you're going to have to pay for all of it, right? Now, that's not totally true, right? There are economists out there who say that, like, the federal government produces money and can produce enough money to do both the cleanup, the shutdown, and the orphan wells. Now, the trick there is that if DTE Energy is successful in building out a $13 or $24 billion infrastructure, and in 2030, the American government says, okay, no more fossil fuels, no matter what, you and I have to pay for that infrastructure, whether or not they use it. And that's called a stranded asset, right? So all these stranded assets that they're building.
Is that kind of similar to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's happening in Florida, where the like water in like Tampa there's like just an abandoned field of like toxic water that was being leaked into I think the Gulf. So is it like kind of similar to that, where like the corporations just leave and then the community is stuck cleaning up?
Stuck with the bill. So
yeah.
I'm not sure about that particular case, but no matter what, we're going to have to foot the bill for the nuts and bolts of a system, no matter what they build, right? So why not, instead of building a new natural gas plant, put a solar panel on my house, right? Like Bill Nye the Science Guy produces so much energy from his house that he gets a check every month, right? Because all that excess energy is going back onto the grid. And so that's the power struggle right now, right? Is that the fossil fuel industry are trying to scare us with our rates. The other solution there, Sam, is something called percentage of income payment. In places like Ohio, New Jersey, other states, you never have to pay over a certain percentage of what you earn, right? That it's capped. So that, you know, some families in Detroit pay 30% of their income on their energy bills. And that's just astounding and immoral, right? And so there are policy fixes that whether or not we're doing renewable or stuck with stranded assets, that it's a harm reduction policy, so that folks won't get shut off and kicked out of the system.
So what about like if the power company themselves, like instead of building a nuclear power plant or a natural gas power plant or a coal power plant, if they went and installed like wind farms somewhere, they installed a solar farm somewhere, and that's where they got their energy source from, do you think that would have a positive impact on low-income families?
So I would argue that the best thing that we can do to uproot systemic oppression is to bring wealth back to our communities. And by putting solar panels in communities, it not only puts the wealth back in because we become the power generators, but it puts more resilience, right, in our energy system. Because if on the east side of Detroit, the power goes out, the west side could still have power. But with centralized generation, when one part of the system goes out, the whole system goes out. And so there's two reasons why decentralized grids make sense more than centralized corporate ownership.
Thank you very much. That was answered a lot of questions that I had, like stemming from that one too.
Great. Anyone else have a question? Well, thanks everyone for joining and your questions and your thoughts today. Really good. Fill out the petition, help us out, trying to get health back in the decision making in Michigan Public Service Commission. And yeah, thanks Ryan for inviting me.
No, truly, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for all the work you do on environmental justice in the state. It really is truly an honor to have you here, and we look forward to working with your initiatives and, you know, Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, MAGIC, which is still a great acronym, We the People Michigan, etc. We look forward to being allies and accomplices up here in the UP.
Awesome. So exciting. Thank you. Yeah. All right.
Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Take care, Michelle.
Bye.